So what if the Soviet Union, one of history's most formidable military, economic, and political superpowers, were to reunite today? Today we'll answer this question throughout 6 categories including history, geography, people, economy, military, and politics. Oh my God! In 1917, the Russian Empire was ruled by Tsar Nicholas II and was in terrible shape. There wasn't enough food to go around, the people were fed up with the monarchy, and Russia was being kicked around by Germany in World War I. Following the failure of a new democratic provisional government, the communist Bolsheviks seized control of the government, pulled Russia out of World War I, and founded what we know today as the USSR. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, was founded on December 30th, 1922 as a communist nation. The Soviet Union would go on to crush the Nazis in World War II and send the first man to space. But it was a nation plagued by corruption and authoritarianism, and suffered instances like a famine in the 1930s that killed roughly 5 million people as a result of several of Stalin's programs. The rapid industrialization of the Soviet Union resulted in major technological advancements, but also meant that food production began to decline for a continuously growing population. Even after World War II, conditions were still rough in the Soviet Union. The average Soviet family lived in a small apartment equipped with only the necessities, and citizens had extremely limited freedom of speech. In the end, the Soviet Union would collapse on Christmas Day of 1991 for many reasons, including the Chernobyl disaster, poor economic conditions, and increased ability to criticize the government under President Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika policies. Oh my God! The USSR was made up by 15 socialist republics, including the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, which is today the Russian Federation, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which is today just Ukraine, the Belarusian SSR, which is now the Republic of Belarus, the Moldavian SSR, which is now the Republic of Moldova, the Estonian SSR, which is now the Republic of Estonia, the Latvian SSR, which is now the Republic of Latvia, the Lithuanian SSR, which is now the Republic of Lithuania, the Georgian SSR, which is now just Georgia, and not to be confused with this one, the Armenian SSR, which is today the Republic of Armenia, the Azerbaijan SSR, which is the Republic of Azerbaijan, the Kyrgyz SSR, which is now the Kyrgyz Republic, the Kazakh SSR, which is now the Republic of Kazakhstan, the Turkmen SSR, which is now just Turkmenistan, the Tajik SSR, which is today the Republic of Tajikistan, and the Uzbek SSR, which is today just Uzbekistan. Needless to say, the Soviet Union was an absolutely massive nation. In fact, Russia alone has a land area of over 6.6 million square miles, or over 17 million square kilometers, making it the largest country in the world. For comparison, the US land area, when compared to that of Russia, is just 57.5% of the size. This means that Russia is roughly equal to the size of about 1.73 USAs. And when we factor in the Soviet Union's 14 other republics, things really start to get crazy. The USSR had a total area of 8,650,000 square miles, or over 22.4 million square kilometers. This makes it equal to the size of 2.28 USAs, 2.24 Canadas, 2.63 Brazils, or 2.91 Australias. This would of course make it the largest country in the world by far. In terms of its neighbors, the Soviet Union would border Norway, Finland, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania in Europe, Turkey, Afghanistan, and Iran in the Middle East, and Mongolia, China, and North Korea in East Asia. This means that the USSR would border 12 countries in total in both Europe and Asia. Oh my God! The USSR would have a population of 301.2 million people, which would make it the 4th most populous country in the world. Today, the Soviet population would be smaller than that of the United States, despite the fact that it was larger 30 years ago. The USSR would have gained about 13.5 million people since 1990, while the US has gained over 84 million people in the same time frame. Breaking down the Soviet population, 48.6% of people would be from Russia, 13.6% would be from Ukraine, 12% would be from Uzbekistan, 6.6% would be from Kazakhstan, and 19.2% would be from all the other republics put together. In 1990, the USSR was home to just 12.9 people per square kilometer, or 33.3 people per square mile. Today, however, it would be home to 34.8 people per square mile, or 13.4 people per square kilometer, making it similar to places like Chad, Bolivia, and the Republic of the Congo. This density map shows just how empty the Soviet Union would be, with Siberia and most of Central Asia being totally desolate. Today, the USSR's 10 largest cities would be Kharkiv, Ukraine, Yekaterinburg, Russia, Novosibirsk, Russia, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Minsk, Belarus, Baku, Azerbaijan, Tashkent, Uzbekistan, Kiev, Ukraine, St. Petersburg, Russia, which would probably be renamed back to Leningrad, and of course Moscow, Russia, which would be the capital just as it was in the former Soviet Union. The USSR would have a total GDP of around $3.08 trillion, making its economy just barely smaller than that of the entire continent of Africa. But unfortunately for the Soviets, this becomes much less impressive when you realize that it would also be smaller than that of the US state of California, which has just a fraction of the population. In fact, the Soviet economy is equal to just 12.1% of the US economy. Overall, it would have the world's 7th largest economy, with its GDP sitting ahead of France, Canada, and Pizzaland, but behind the United Kingdom, India, and Germany. Considering its would-be population and would-be GDP, the USSR would have a GDP per capita of around $10,225, which would be smaller than Russia's current roughly $14,000 GDP per capita. Overall, it would be comparable to countries like Nauru, Grenada, the Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, and Mexico. The Soviet Union was and would again be blessed by an abundance of oil and would produce around 13,725,000 barrels of it every single day if it were to reunite. This would make it the second largest oil producer in the world, sitting behind only the United States and ahead of major producers like Saudi Arabia, Canada, China, and literally every other country. Breaking down its extensive production, 78.3% of it would come from Russia, 13.6% would come from Kazakhstan, 5.2% would come from Azerbaijan, and 2.9% would come from all the other republics put together. In 1990, the Soviet Union's daily oil production was actually greater than that of the United States, despite the fact that today the Americans would have the lead. The Soviet Union would have a formidable fighting force with around 1.7 million active duty personnel, the second highest personnel count in the world. Additionally, it would have an incredible 3.8 million reserve personnel, again the second highest in the world. The Soviet Union would possess about 5,977 nuclear weapons with the capability to launch from land, air, and sea, known as a nuclear triad. Overall, the USSR would possess the highest number of nuclear weapons in the world, with 100% of its stockpile coming from Russia. All things considered, the USSR would have either the most powerful or second most powerful military in the world, but it's pretty much impossible to know for sure. Every strong nation needs a group of friends to hang out with, so who would the Soviet Union's allies be? We could consider the former communist Warsaw Pact nations, which included Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Poland, and Hungary. The only problem with this is that all of these nations are now members of NATO, a Western-led alliance. It is pretty safe to say that these countries would want nothing to do with the reunited Soviet Union, so where else could we look? What better place to start than the Communist Club, the 5 currently existing communist countries of the world, except this place isn't perfect. China and Vietnam, for example, have their own issues with territorial disputes, and Vietnam somehow enjoys a relatively decent relationship with the United States, considering, well, you know what happened. Additionally, the Soviet Union and China could experience a level of competition just as they did in the 20th century. Nonetheless, the USSR's closest allies would probably be Iran, Syria, North Korea, and China, for many reasons, but the most important of them being their shared hatred of a certain gunslinging, freedom-loving, burger-consuming, ice-cream-licking, eagle-screeching nation, the Dominion of Canada, obviously. On the other end of the spectrum, some countries would certainly be vocal about their opposition of the return of the Soviet Union. Some countries we can be pretty certain about would include Japan, South Korea, the entirety of NATO, which would now be a few members short, the Philippines, this island, Australia, and New Zealand. The most likely leader of the Soviet Union would be Vladimir Putin, the current president of Russia. He is a member of United Russia, but would have to switch over to the Communist Party. And of course, there's also the possibility that someone else entirely could become leader. The USSR could go down either a strict or relaxed path of governance. Assuming it chooses the strict path, all land and business would be completely controlled by the state. Free speech and expression would be censored, and all Western media platforms would be banned. Elections would be permitted, but all candidates would have to be communists, and the KGB would closely monitor and encourage voters. In a more relaxed situation, state ownership of business and land would continue, but some private ownership would be allowed. Free speech and expression would still be limited, but to a lesser extent, and Western platforms would be allowed, but heavily monitored. And elections would be permitted, but only a select few parties would be able to run. Click here to watch 8 whole minutes of geographical facts, or click here to watch a comparison between the United States and China.